Standing in a dark room, I found myself surrounded by a deafening silence. A silence only occasionally interrupted by a muffled cry. I could hear my pulse pounding, and I could feel my palms sweating as I looked through the mirror and the window and into the eyes of a man who was being put to death for the crimes he committed. As the drugs coursed through his veins, I remember standing there questioning everything that I believed and doubting everything that I thought. But in that moment, full of despair, doubt, and death, I had no idea the journey it would take me on to experience love, freedom, and grace. To understand how I got to a moment where I watched a man be executed, you have to understand how I got into prisons. At 27 years old, I found myself working for the director of the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction here in Ohio, Gary Moore. And at that point in my life, at 27 years old, I had spent way more time complaining about the government than I did ever thinking about working for the government. But I got to work for a man who was in that industry for over 40 years, a visionary, a true reformer. And Gary rocked my world in many ways. One of the things that Gary told me was, Grant, you have to understand that incarceration is about way more than just the crime. I learned that in this country, we talk a lot about generational poverty, but we very quickly ignore the impact of generational incarceration. I learned that true reform in this country doesn't come from the government. It comes from people like you and I, who are willing to step out of our comfort zones and do something about it. That sounded all great and well to me when Gary shared that with me, and I said, great, I'm excited to find the person who does that. At 27 years old, working in the government and agency with over 12,000 employees, I couldn't understand what role I could play. I'm younger than everybody. I have no experience in this field, still trying to this day figure out why they hired me. And here I am in this position working for a man who is changing the industry. The first question I had to ask myself is, why is this important? Why is prison important? And I had to understand a few things. And what I understood came in the form of a few numbers. In 1975, in this state of Ohio, there were just under 110,000 people under criminal justice supervision. That's in prison, in jail, on probation, or on parole. Just under 110,000. Today, as we sit here, that number is almost at 350,000. If you are a child with an incarcerated parent, you are 7 times more likely to be in prison yourself. I've gone into prisons and I've met mothers who are locked up in the same prison as their daughters. I have gone into prisons and I have sat next to fathers who are shackled next to their sons. And the one that really got me is the racial disparity. In this state, 14% of our entire population is African American. 14%. In this state's prison population, 45% is African American. And if you are a black man in this country, 1 in 3 of you will spend time behind bars in your life. 1 in 3. And if you're like me, you've got this pit in your stomach right now. And those numbers, they told me 2 things. 1, we have a system that's broken. And 2, something needs to be done about it. But here I was, 27 years old. What could I do about it? I could go into prisons, as I was, volunteering and help build into the lives of those who are there, but this might come as a shock to you, but I am a white guy, and as a white guy, grew up middle class, wanting for nothing, not experiencing any adversity in my life except for being cut from the 7th grade basketball team. How could I go into prison and sit in front of somebody who had never experienced hope in their life? How could I go into prison, face a man or a woman, and look straight in their eyes and say, there's hope. I don't understand what you're experiencing. I've never been there, and you have no reason to believe me, but I promise there's hope. And that takes me back to that moment where I was watching this man die. And what I felt from God in that moment is a simple say yes. Now, in a movie, The yes would be very clear, and the end of the story would be me running off into the sunset doing some massive thing. But I had no idea what yes meant. I had no idea what yes meant. I just knew I was supposed to say yes and do something. And so, from that moment on, everything changed. My wife and I decided this organization that we've created where we go into prisons and volunteer and meet the men and women in there, let's dive deeper. So yes meant a few things, as we ended up finding out. Yes meant going into prisons and not just sitting down with men and women in there, but helping them prepare for life, how to navigate life behind bars, and how to navigate life after. There are a lot of amazing organizations in this state and this country who do great reentry work. They're there, ready for individuals when they get out of prison. But we said, what does it look like if we go in and meet them the day they get locked up? What if we walk through that entire journey with them and give them the opportunity to experience freedom behind bars? Saying yes also meant coming alongside the loved ones of those incarcerated men and women. Think about that. In this state, 350,000 under some form of criminal justice supervision. How many loved ones there must be in this state alone? And as someone who has been that loved one, I can attest to the guilt that comes with it, the stigma that comes with it, the pain when people ask, hey, where's he at? Where's she at? And there's others who, when that individual gets locked up, that family's sole breadwinner is out of the equation. How do we pay for bills? How do we put food on the table at night? How do we get kids to school? And so yes for us meant investing in those individuals who are always forgotten, helping them find hope too. And yes also meant coming alongside the government. So part of that yes meant me leaving the government to go into ministry work and to focus on this in a deeper capacity. But when I worked for the government, I learned those two things I shared with you earlier. The system is broken, and something needs to be done to fix it. The easiest thing for me to do would be to give you a TED talk on how the system is broken, but I would take up all 3 hours today. So instead of that, what I wanted to do is show you how we came along the government to make a change. What I learned in the government is that while the system is broken, there are amazing people working in it who want to bring about change. There are amazing people working in our prisons who want to invest in the lives of the people who are incarcerated there. And for us, that meant stepping into the gap where they couldn't and we could. For us, that meant going into those prisons and developing relationships that last longer than just a 1-hour class during the week. For us, that meant instead of saying, government, you're the worst, that meant saying, okay, here's where you can succeed as a government, here's where you can't, and here's where we fit in. And I still doubted. Like, we were going into these prisons, we were seeing life transformation, we were seeing people leave prison and be successful, reuniting with their families, and I was still doubting. And there was one day that all changed. We were in Lebanon Correctional Institution, which is one of the most violent prisons in the tri-state, and we were having our very first racial reconciliation class called Undivided. Taking in a class on racial reconciliation into one of the most violent prisons, what could go wrong? And so we're in there, and right before the class starts, there's this huge interruption outside our classroom. A massive fight breaks out between a member of the Aryan Brotherhood, a white supremacist, and a former Black Panther. And the prison goes on lockdown, and a little bit later, they get it cleaned up to get the men taken away, and class is able to start. 6 weeks worth of the class, and it was great. Fast forward later that year, we decided, let's do that class again, and it worked well the first time. And in through those front doors walked the two men, remember the Aryan Brotherhood and the Black Panther who got in that fight. Here they come walking in those doors, and my heart sank. Not only that, but these random groups that we set up, guess who's sitting side by side? Talk about doubting. And in that moment, I said, what are we doing? What have I done? And over these 6 weeks, I watched these men sit side by side, and I watched walls fall. I stood there, and I watched these men become vulnerable with one another. And in that 6th and final week, I watched a white supremacist with a swastika tattooed on his head apologized to a former Black Panther, and hugged through tears. And in that moment, everything I ever doubted, everything I thought wasn't possible, everything, all those massive numbers I threw out to you that I thought we'll never be able to help these people, these two men showed me if that can happen, anything can happen. And in the 3.5 years since that happened, we've had 35,000 inmates go through our classes. We have impacted lives with amazing volunteers who give of their time freely to go into prisons and meet individuals because we understand what Gary years ago taught me, and that was reform happens in our communities. Reform doesn't mean it has to come from somebody who has a big degree or somebody who has done it for decades. It comes from somebody willing to say yes. Yes, I'll go out of my comfort zone. Yes, I'll go in there where I have no business being. Yes, I will go in there and sit down with people I don't understand to try to just do something. When I was in that execution chamber, doubting everything I thought I believed, I never knew the journey it would take me on. I have gone into prisons and I have experienced amazing things that I've never experienced outside those walls. Inside that barbed wire, I have sat down face to face with men and women that we in society deem to be the worst of the worst. I've sat down with men and women who we as society don't even give them names. We call them by a number. I sat down face to face with men and women who are defined by their greatest sin while we hide behind our perfect facade. And I've learned from them. They have taught me how to be a better father. They have taught me how to be a loving husband, a better brother, a better son. They've taught me through their failure and their grief and their success. And every step along the way, I have met amazing people. I don't know where their hearts are. I don't know what they're thinking, but I'm grateful for every moment that I've had with them, even those whose final breaths I've witnessed firsthand. Thank you.